Hello, everybody. Welcome to Free Kiwis. I'm delighted to have today Musa al-Gharbi, who is an associate professor of communication and journalism at Stony Brook University. So welcome to Free Kiwis and welcome to New Zealand, because I think you've only just gotten here, right?
Yeah. I was in Auckland yesterday, but only here for a very short time so far.
Great. So I first connected with you around the time when I joined Heterodox Academy. So I'm thinking that was sort of 2018 or 2019. So you were already reasonably high up in that organization, I think. You were reasonably sort of heavily involved with that organization. Can you explain to our listeners what Heterodox Academy is and why you decided to get involved with that organization when you did?
Yeah, sure. So Heterodox Academy is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization in the United States that tries to promote viewpoint diversity, open expression, and constructive disagreement at colleges and universities. Today, they have about 6,000 members that are faculty members, grad students, and administrators. And so that's what Heterodox Academy is. And in a nutshell, it was co-founded by a social psychologist, Jonathan Haidt.
Former guest on the Free Kiwis podcast.
Awesome. Alongside a sociologist, Chris Martin, and a legal scholar, Nick Rosenkrantz. And then so I got involved with HXA about a year after they started, a little less than that. And I served as the communications director for 4 years from 2016 to 2020. And then after I stepped back from that to work on my PhD, because it was kind of tough to do a full-time job while pursuing a PhD, I stayed involved with the organization for a long time. In fact, I came back part-time to help them launch a new center in New York, the Siegel Center for Academic Pluralism. So they have a kind of a center in New York for conducting research and bringing in fellows from abroad. And so I helped launch that a couple years ago. And so that's Heterodox Academy and my involvement loosely. I became involved with them, ironically, because I got canceled by Fox News in 2014, and by canceled, I mean I lost an academic job following a Fox News campaign against me. In the aftermath of that, I decided to start engaging more with the right. I realized that part of the reason why people were willing to believe this insane caricature that was being painted of me and my colleagues is because people like me didn't really engage much with the typical Fox News user.
Can you say more about how they canceled you? What you said that led to that?
Well, the original source of the issue was I wrote this article in this journal, Middle East Policy. It was very exciting. It was a top-ranked, top-cited journal in the field at the time. It was about the civil war in Syria and to what extent statistics were being misused. So it was just a conventional academic paper. But at that time, 2014, ISIS was a big thing, and there was a kind of cottage industry where if you were someone who was from the Middle East and didn't like Muslims, or if you were someone who used to be Muslim but you're not anymore, you could kind of go on right-leaning media like Fox News and be like, Muslims are terrible, I would know. And there was kind of a cottage industry for that. So someone who was kind of affiliated with that circuit somehow came across my article on Syria, hated it, didn't mention Islam, the essay wasn't about Islam at all, but he hated it and tried to get into an argument with me about it on Twitter. And I humiliated this dude. I don't even engage in social media like this anymore, but I really humiliated this dude. Showed him that he didn't know much about Syria, and then he tried to shift to these principles about liberty and justice for some reason, and I was like, cool, yeah, I'm a philosopher, let's do that. Really just twisted the knife.
By humiliated, it sounds like you mean you just sort of laid out some key facts that he'd overlooked, right? You don't strike me as someone who takes pleasure in sort of bullying people or whatever. You were just engaging in robust debate, right?
I was engaging in robust debate, but in a way that, again, today I don't strike you that way because I'm not that way anymore. Okay. But at the time, I was more jerkish than I am today.
Interesting. Okay.
More pugilistic, especially because I didn't respect this person. Because again, he was spending all day every day basically stirring up antipathy against Muslims on right-leaning media by painting kind of wild, like this whole jam. So I had zero respect for this person, and that definitely came through in my interactions with him. But yeah, I really. But he responded to being humiliated online, though, by trying to launch a smear campaign against me, by taking bits and pieces of things that I wrote in various articles, taking them way out of context, and trying to paint me as some kind of anti-American radical who's corrupting the youth. This is wild, because the whole reason I was doing any work on national security and foreign policy to begin with is because I'm from a military family and a military community, and I had a twin brother who died while serving in Afghanistan. And so the idea that I'm some kind of, and the point of my work was to try to help other families from going through the kind of loss that my own family was going through. So the idea that I was some kind of anti-American, troop-hating, whatever, however they depicted me, was wild. But yeah, on election day 2014, the Republicans took the Senate, which is very exciting for Fox News. But until that time, while they were waiting for the election results, they basically killed the airtime by dragging me. And so, like, the first thing you would have seen if you went to foxnews.com was my face. Every department and institution I was affiliated with got flooded with death threats and hate mail, including, like, I ran an academic consortium.
So what were they saying? I still am not clear. Like, what were they saying about you? What was the main charge? Like, you hate America, or?
Yeah, that I hate America, that I hate the troops.
Because you said what? That ISIS are a formidable adversary, or what was the claim that?
No, so I guess there was a few things. Like I said, they just took a bunch of things from random essays, but I guess the more central one in the Fox News reporting specifically was some essay I wrote called that got called, because again, writers don't make their headlines. This is a thing that people should definitely understand.
That's right. Yeah.
but it ended
a lot of experience of that since starting work here. Yeah.
Yeah. But it ended up getting called, I guess, something like the U.S. is a greater threat to stability in the Middle East than ISIS, or something like that.
Okay.
And in the article, though, the gist of the article was that the U.S. has a lot of problems, and that we should be focusing on what we're doing on our own society rather than trying to terraform all these other countries abroad. The irony is that if this essay had come out like a year later, it would have been received as like it was completely, Donald Trump made the exact same series of arguments. It would have been perceived as like a left MAGA article.
Yeah. But that wasn't the Fox News line at the time, right?
Yeah.
It was more interventionist.
There's this, there's this saying that the only thing that's worse than being too late is being too early, I guess. But so at the time,
that's right. Okay, so you get canceled. So what does that involve for you? I mean, you lose an academic job. Do you literally sort of get fired from an academic job or your academic position because the university manager comes to you and says, "I've seen you're being anti-American on Fox News," and what was the process?
Yeah. So in the immediate aftermath, the University of Arizona, for one, threw me under the bus. They were like, "Oh yeah, we condemn Dr. al-Gharbi's purported remarks," but not doctor. I wasn't a doctor then. Musa al-Gharbi's reported remarks. But we here at University of Arizona believe in academic freedom, and then they declined to renew my teaching contract.
Yeah. However, yes, that's right. That's classic.
Yeah.
We had an incident here. I don't know if you heard about the listener letter yet, where some 7 professors at the University of Auckland, professors of science, wrote a letter to a magazine called the New Zealand Listener saying that Maori traditional lore is not the same as science, and then everyone attacked them. And the university vice chancellor put out a statement saying, "I completely respect and defend these academics' right to free speech. However, Mataranga Maori is science," or something of that nature, right? So they didn't quite sort of get fired, but one person got taken off teaching for first years. 2 others got expelled from the Royal Society. Anyway, it was a whole to-do. It sounds like that. So they sort of said, "We respect your free speech," but then they kind of got rid of you the next year.
Yeah, well, the next semester. And that was after condemning me for remarks that I didn't even make, that Fox News misrepresented. And then on top of that, I applied to PhD programs in the aftermath of this at University of Arizona. Well, and I was blackballed there in terms of hiring because the person who was my boss, after this whole thing died down, he wanted to hire me again. He was told from his superiors that under no circumstances are you going to hire this. He's not going to be in a classroom here again. So I was, and then so I applied to PhD programs at the University of Arizona, and I had letters from sitting faculty in those departments. I had already taken graduate courses in those departments and gotten A's in them. Again, I was actually publishing in journals already at that stage of my life.
Yeah, I mean, you must have been quite precocious, actually, because you're on the news and you were doing an MA at the time.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you're ahead of the curve in getting canceled.
But and I
getting
got
canceled earlier in your career than most people.
Yeah, did it before it was fashionable. Yeah. But I got rejected from all of the PhD programs that I applied to. This is the only reason I even applied to Columbia, is because I got rejected from my safe schools. Like I didn't have a vision in my mind to be an Ivy League academic. It wasn't even in the scope of possibility in my horizon of whatever. Yeah.
So you come from like a relatively, why do you say that? You come from a relatively humble background? Like, why was that not in your imagination?
Yeah. I come from a military background, small town. I was at community. I was kind of a non-traditional student. My path through community college took a long time.
Can I just do a weird digression right now, actually, because I'm also from a military family. And I've talked to several people in the sort of heterodox movement, and several of them are from, I'm sure there's like an overrepresentation of people from military backgrounds in heterodox circles. And I often wonder, is it something to do with kind of, I've read there are papers on this, right? Like, I think it's called sort of relational flexibility or something. Like you move to different communities through your life and you kind of get used to the idea that there are just different rules. And it might actually be correlated with the ability to sort of think outside the box. I mean, this is very kind of self-aggrandizing as a sort of, and we probably should be we probably should beware of social scientific theories that sort of help us big ourselves up. But do you think there's anything to that?
I mean, possibly. And then also, in the United States, the military was also a one of the big drivers of integration. So like my father is black, and for black people of his generation, the military was basically one of the only like major paths to social mobility, especially from the communities that he grew up in the South and so on. If
you think of like the very top level of American politics, like people like Colin Powell, and there's a recent black defense secretary in the States as well.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
A lot of those guys seem to reach the very top level through the military. It's interesting.
Yeah. And my father, I mean, he reached the highest level that an enlisted person could reach. He had a very esteemed military career, and he has and he's since then had a kind of really prolific government career as well, in a way that, again, that most other black men of his generation. And in fact, you can even see this when you look at his siblings and so on. This is, the kind of life that he was able to have as a result of the military is just, was just not typical for most black people who were not in the military at the time. And so, yeah, I think there's a sense in which the military, especially in the U.S., was kind of a key driver of also kind of cross-cultural exchange and things like this, in a way that, because, especially when you get deployed, the thing that they were urging, that they were trying to urge, is that, yeah, you might have these differences. You might be Asian American, you might be black, whatever. But when you're in the battle, when you're in the trenches there, you're brothers. You're part of the same,
and you're a human being. You're made of flesh and bone, and that can get blown up no matter what your background is, right?
Yeah.
So, so leaving the Army aside, so why did we get into that? Oh, yeah, because you said you weren't even dreaming of Ivy League, but you got into Columbia. And then, so let's go back to...
I got into Columbia, after I got rejected from my safe schools. Yeah.
So let's get back to how you get involved in Heterodox Academy. So you've already been canceled. Then you think, we've got to do something about this, or what?
Well, yeah. So I started.
We've got to understand. You said this before. You wanted to understand the other side, right?
Well, yeah. Well, so I started. I responded to getting canceled by Fox by starting sending essays that I would have normally sent to left-leaning outlets like Salon or Al Jazeera. I started sending them to outlets like the American Conservative or the National Review. So basically, I started to engage. I decided I'd respond to getting canceled by the right by engaging more with the right. I realized that part of the problem is that, to the extent that people like me engage with a typical Fox News viewer, it's often in a sneering, condescending, confrontational way. And this is part of what fed their sense of mistrust, what part of what made it easy for people like me to be. And so I decided I would engage more with the right. And to my surprise, when I pitched articles to the American Conservative and so on, I didn't even know if they would get picked up, but they were eager to publish a lot of these, and they were challenging essays, so they would publish them. The conversations that I had were a lot more rewarding to talk to people who didn't already agree with me. And it turns out a lot of the readers also were very excited to have some black Muslim dude up in their space, but like who wasn't there like, meh, but was there to like talk about the issues. Are
you practicing Muslim now?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I thought you might have meant Muslim background. It's interesting.
No, yeah, I was Catholic background. Muslim now.
Oh, okay. Because at one point I think I read somewhere that were you a Catholic priest? Are you trained to be a Catholic priest?
I was. This was my first life plan, was to be a Catholic priest. Yeah, and I had a, but so I started writing more for the right, and then doing that, writing for people who didn't already agree with me was more satisfying. Going through the process of thinking about how to talk about contentious issues for people who didn't already agree with me helped me see a lot of blind spots, assumptions I was taking for granted, things like this. So it enriched my own understanding of issues. And then I also came to realize that doing this kind of work was also just more practically important. So before, if I was going to try to get people, say, not to bomb Syria, if the U.S. was thinking about bombing Syria and I thought that was a bad idea, then what I would have done is published an essay in like Al Jazeera, here's why you shouldn't bomb Syria. And a bunch of people who already agree that that's a bad idea would read that essay and we'd all go, yeah, we're so smart. and then, and I realized after writing a bit for the right that if you want to, for instance, have any hope of making any kind of marginal impact about whether or not the U.S. bombs Syria, what you need to do is go to the people who do want to bomb Syria and explain to them in a way that they will find compelling, not in the way that you find in a way that they will find compelling, why that's a bad idea. And that's obvious, but basically no one does it. So I started trying to do that, and this radically increased the impact of my work. I had the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff for the Army, Martin Dempsey, so the highest ranking military official in any of the branches, cite some of my novel statistics to explain why a no-fly zone in Syria probably wouldn't work as intended. I had the State Department cite my research to explain U.S. policy in Syria, and so on. This is a level of impact I would have never had if I was just preaching to the choir with a bunch of other people who already agreed with me, and we're going,
right.
And so this led me to kind of. So now when I write for anyone, I mean, I'm a columnist for The Guardian. I also write occasionally for right-leaning outlets still. What I try to do is I try to say something that I think that audience needs to hear but doesn't want to hear. So this is what I try to do no matter who I'm writing for. And so this kind of set of experiences is also what primed me.
What do you think Free Kiwis listeners need to hear? We don't know the audience well enough. But.
Yeah, I don't know the audience well enough.
The heterodox free. Well, maybe at the end of your trip, you could come back to us on that one. Like, what does the New Zealand free speech movement need to hear that no one else is going to tell it?
Yeah. Anyway, that's the thing that so that'll be in my brain now, percolating. I'm sure. And then so Height. I've been following his work for a while. He did this work on moral dumbfounding, which is about how like a lot of people have these strong moral convictions, but they're not ultimately based on anything. They think they are. But you can give people these examples of like a family has a beloved dog. The dog dies, but it's healthy. Like its flesh is fine. They decide to chop up the dog and eat it after it dies. Is that wrong? And most Americans say, yeah. And then you go, okay, why? And it turns out that it's actually very, like, we have these strong moral judgments about a lot of things that ultimately aren't based on anything, like anything that we can really articulate.
Right. Because the sort of mainstream moral atmosphere is one of utilitarianism. Like, that's what we kind of grab towards. Like, is the dog suffering or something? But I think that a lot of Haidt's examples seem to be tailored towards showing that there are other considerations. There are other moral considerations, right? So I think one of them is sanctity or something. Yes. I don't know if that's the one that he thinks is actually at play in this example. But, it's this idea that we shouldn't, like, violate the body of a friend who's died and that kind of thing.
Yeah, this was the thing that helped lead him to, it was kind of early research that led him eventually towards the moral foundations theory stuff. So I'd been following his work for a while, but then especially when he started in 2011 talking about viewpoint diversity and social psych and why it's important, I began following that really closely after I got canceled and responded by engaging with the right and so on, because it really kind of jived with my own experience. And so I saw him randomly at Columbia University. He went to a talk. Christina Hoff Sommers came to Columbia. She's a kind of she's a feminist, but a feminist who's very critical of a lot of contemporary.
I would say a liberal feminist, but in the old sense of liberal.
Yeah. And so she came to Columbia, did a talk. I went to that because I was curious. John Haidt was there, and I recognized him immediately. And so I went up and I was like, "Oh my God, you're John Haidt!" And he was like, "Yep." He was just a very chill, humble dude. And we started talking a bit, and then he was like, "You know what? You seem really interesting. Why don't you come down to my office? I'm trying to get this thing off the ground." And that thing was Heterodox Academy. At that time, we just met every week in John Haidt's office at NYU.
It's funny because, John Haidt sort of started Free Kiwis, and so my colleague Michael, who's not here today, is on holiday with his family, so sorry to the listeners. But we were both at Victoria University, Wellington teaching, and John Haidt came here, hosted by the New Zealand Initiative, and gave a talk. And after that talk, John Haidt was going to meet up with the two Heterodox Academy members in Wellington, which is Michael and I. And that's how we met each other. And then we started talking, and then we got in a lot of trouble. Both of us ended up outside of the university. Both of us ended up here. But, for the last few years, we've been doing this podcast. So John Haidt has had a huge influence on this movement.
Yeah. He's really, he's had a huge influence. Even his new book, The Anxious Generation, has had a significant impact on legislation. He just does this really high impact work in a way that there are just very few contemporary academics that consistently have this kind of significant impact in terms of building movements, changing, building organizations, things like this. He just
Okay, so you just used a term that's really interesting, and I want to go back to. So you talked about viewpoint diversity. So in my understanding, this is one of the sort of key ideas the Heterodox Academy created, but certainly kind of publicized. So can you talk about that? Like, why is that such a key idea for the heterodox movement?
Yeah. So viewpoint diversity is the idea that, in academia, we have a lot of systems where we make decisions by committee. We have things like peer review for publications, committee decisions for hiring, committee decisions for admissions, and so on. The theory underlying why we make decisions this way is that all of us individually, we have kind of partial and situated knowledge. We all have these biases and blind spots. We have these limits to the methods we use, to the things that we've read, to the theoretical frameworks we're relying on. And the idea is that collectively, we can't individually just escape all of our biases and limitations and perceive the world in an objective, comprehensive way. But collectively, we can catch each other's blind spots. We can help add to the picture for things that other people missed, and we can collectively produce something that looks more like comprehensive, objective, reliable knowledge. So that's why we have things like peer review. That's why we make decisions by committee and so on. This is the insight that lies at the core of how a lot of academic operations are structured. Okay, sounds good. The thing is, though, these systems only really work as intended if you actually do have a substantive diversity of life experiences, of perspectives, of theoretical and methodological frameworks, of moral and political commitments, and so on. If you don't, in the absence of that, then a lot of these systems that are designed to correct biases can actually exacerbate them instead. It can be harder for interesting ideas to break through. You can have these systematic blind spots. So you have misinformation cascades and whole null fields of research that no one can see, that there's just not anything, that it's just a useless line of work because everyone shares the same. And so in order for these systems to actually work as intended, you need this kind of substantive difference in moral and political commitments, in life experiences, in methodological and theoretical tools that people are drawing on, and things like this. This is how the magic of academia actually works as intended. And Haidt's big argument is that when we look at a lot of social science and humanities fields today, that's not what we see. Academia is increasingly drawn from this narrow and idiosyncratic slice of society. You can see that on any level. If you look at class backgrounds, if you look at ethnic backgrounds, if you look at religious affiliations, if you look at political and ideological leanings, no matter how you slice it, it's kind of this narrow and weird, non-representative slice of society that dominates the academy. A lot of our fields are very, very homogenous, especially in terms of moral and political views and class backgrounds. And this systematically distorts our understanding of a lot of social phenomena. So as I show in some of my own work, when social scientists try to understand why people voted for Trump, for instance, because almost all of us are Democrats, almost all of us live in cities or suburbs, and we're from relatively affluent backgrounds and so on. It's really easy.
Talking about social scientists.
Social scientists.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's really easy for us to tell these kind of ignorant and pathologizing narratives about other people. We don't have any investment in them or their communities. We don't have any substantial concern for them. They seem alien to us. So
it's basically the idea is because there's nobody there to kind of correct you, right? Because you have this tendency yourself to think, oh, Trump voters are ignorant and stupid. And even if you're not that bad, you just sort of think, oh, they're probably kind of low IQ or they don't have as many degrees or something. You have that tendency. And then I think everyone's a bit like this. You're going to follow that tendency to a certain extent unless somebody sort of somebody different sort of comes to you and says, I read what you wrote in your paper and you go too far there.
Yeah.
And I'm going to serve as some kind of a block. Like I'm actually going to argue with you or I'm going to suggest you rewrite your paper, right? Otherwise, you're just going to go along with it. Well, and you're especially going to go along with it if instead of that happening, you write your paper saying, maybe Trump voters are just ignorant and stupid. And everybody in the room says, you know what? You need to exaggerate that more. Or you need to emphasize that more because it's even more true. And that's sort of more what academia seems to be like at the moment, right?
Yeah. And I did. I showed this. I showed this in some of my research. So, for instance, one thing that you see in the literature on Trump and Trump voters, just to stick with this example, is there are all of these studies that the literal design of the study is which negative trait explains why people voted for Trump. Is it that they're more stupid, like racist? Is it that they're more authoritarian? Is it that they're ignorant and uneducated? Is it that they're kind of low IQ? Is it, like which of these negative traits explains? And of course, what I often stress to people is like two things. First, we don't even do studies like why do people vote for Hillary Clinton or Barack Obama? Like it doesn't even seem like an interesting social science question to us. Why would someone vote for a Democrat? Like this doesn't seem like a. And then we sometimes do like which negative trait explains why people failed to vote for for the Democrat?
But like misogyny, right?
Yeah. And but what we never do. But if someone did design a study that's like which negative trait explained why someone voted for Hillary Clinton. Is it that they're communists or they're atheists or they hate America? Like we would notice the problem with that study.
Right. You would notice the bias.
Immediately. It's a prejudicial study design. So that's, and the bigger problem other than the prejudicial study design is you can sometimes get these glaring errors, these glaring, unmistakable errors that not only do you have like really smart, sophisticated scholars that make these kind of obvious flubs. That can happen to anyone in principle. But what's striking to me is that not only does that scholar not see the error, but the peer reviewers don't see the obvious error. The editors don't see the obvious error.
Yeah.
The journalists who report on the paper, often very sophisticated, data-savvy social science journalists don't see the error.
There's another possibility, right, which is that they all do see the error, but they don't want to say anything about it.
Well, what's wild is, so I do talks showing this. So I have a paper that I published on this called Race in the Race for the White House on Social Research in the Age of Trump, where I walk through some of these examples, and then I also do some talks on this. And so what I often do to help initiate people into seeing this is I'll put up a chart that visualizes polarization. And I'm like, look, there's these two lines. They're closer together. They get further apart. The lines are just in black and white, and they're labeled A and B. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, okay, so which line shifted more? Who's more responsible for the fact that these lines are further apart? No one has any problem. It's this one, it's this one, it's this one. And I go through a couple. And I go, oh, okay, great. And then I'm like, well, so the thing is something interesting happens, though, when you start coloring the lines red and blue and attaching labels like Democrat and Republican, then all of a sudden, these obvious trends don't seem so obvious anymore. And so then I showed them the actual graphs that I took those, that the lines that I just showed them were from actual graphs of Democrats and
There's also
Republicans.
men and women has this effect as well, right? That they're sort of going further apart politically, and there's a lot of stuff, a lot of moral panic. Well, a lot of actual legitimate worry about men becoming more radical because of the internet, manosphere, and all that. But then actually some of the information or some of the data I've seen suggests that like women have gotten more radical than men.
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
And
women have
actually
shifted
not that
more.
much stuff about sort of women radicalizing online. Starting to be now, but like
Yeah. And so this is what I show is like on chart after chart, you can see that actually the Democrats shifted more than Republicans on a lot of issues. For a lot of charts, if you look at Democrats, Republicans, and moderates, or liberals, independents, and conservatives, it's actually the liberal bar that is the clear outlier, not just relative to conservatives, but also relative to moderates, or not just relative to Republicans, but also relative to independents. You can see the Republicans and the independents are very close together, and they've been trending in the same direction. And then the blue line is doing this other weird thing, and they're way far away on the chart. But because almost all of us are on the blue line, we notice the gap is growing between us and other people.
Okay.
But we assume that the reason the gap is growing is because those people are changing.
Right.
Those people are getting
This
more.
is the perfect segue to the next bit of the podcast because I want to talk about your book. Your book is called We Have Never Been Woke. So let's talk about wokeness and what that is, because I had this experience, maybe because I have, this is another thing about coming from a military family. Like I think I was exposed to more conservative ideas in my youth. So I was actually kind of more on the left liberal side when I was in academia, but then I started to notice all of a sudden around 2017, 2018, this huge explosion of everybody talking about the same stuff in academia, and also kind of like in parts of Wellington that were sort of adjacent to academia. It was all about sort of misogyny and racism and all the rest, right? And our mutual friend David Rosado has these really nice graphs where he looks at the number of times these words occur in media across the United States and also journal articles. I think media in the UK, Spain, other countries. And he's right. Like, I mean, sorry, we're right. Like when I had this impression, that was correct, that actually these words just explode in frequency over this period. Yeah. So there does seem to be this real phenomenon. So is that what you mean by woke? I mean, I know it's a contested term. You don't avoid the term?
Yeah, in the book, I talk about this phenomenon called a Great Awakening. So in the discourse, there was a lot of talk that something changed after 2010. A lot of that conversation was based on vibes, kind of, and anecdotes. So like something weird will happen at Middlebury College, and then people will make very big claims about American society and culture, kids these days, all this stuff based on this one incident at this one college. Mm-hmm. And I was like, well, if there is some big cultural change underway, it should be something we can measure, right? and I wasn't the only one with this thought. David Rosado, as you said, here in New Zealand, fantastic computer scientist. I co-authored a couple of papers with him. And Eric Kaufman in the UK. So there's a kind of a cluster of us, social scientists, who were like, who had this same insight that if there is a big change, we don't actually have to rely on anecdotes and vibes. We can measure it in a systematic way. And so collectively, we've worked through tens of millions of academic research papers, journalistic outlets, entertainment outputs. I in the book, I walk through changes in political alignments, ideological identification, protest activity, all this kind of stuff. And you can see a few things. One, you can see that there was a change after 2010. It's not a moral panic. It's not like there was something that changed. You can see that the change, though, was not broad-based. So it wasn't like everyone in society was changing. And it wasn't that the marginalized and the disadvantaged were changing. It wasn't that poor people were changing and non-whites were changing. They were pretty steady. Instead, the people who were shifting were highly educated, relatively affluent, urban and suburban white people. And the institutions that knowledge economy professionals work at, and the communities that have large concentrations of knowledge industries, like so if you look at the kinds of communities that have big concentrations of finance, tech, publishing, and so on, there you saw big shifts happening, a lot of contestations and eruptions. If you look at places that are kind of more distant from the knowledge economy, you see...
Yeah, so that's Wellington, basically.
Yeah.
in New Zealand, like Wellington and Auckland, and then the rest of the country is somewhere else.
Yeah.
So these knowledge industry people, these are the symbolic capitalists that you talk about in the book, right?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So
Okay.
symbolic capitalist is someone who makes a living based on what they know, on who they know, and on how they're known. So they're people who make a living by cultivating and leveraging what sociologists call symbolic capital on behalf of themselves and other people. A less nerdy way of saying that, a less obtuse way of saying that, is that symbolic capitalists are people who work in fields like consulting, finance, law, administration, media, education, and so on. People who make a living by manipulating symbols and data and ideas and impressions instead of, for instance, providing physical goods or services to people. And so the we and we have never been woke is symbolic capitalists. One of the things that's interesting about us as a group is that symbolic capitalists tend to think about politics in a way that's very different from most other Americans, where we tend to be more ideological, more ideologically extreme, more dogmatic. In terms of our political leanings, we tend to ideologically identify as like left or liberal or progressive, something that says not right wing.
Because that's the out group effectively now, right, in academia?
Yeah.
Those are the bad guys.
And not just in academia, but also, of course, all the other professions that require academic degrees. So in journalism, consulting, so on, you see the same kind of skew. Politically, symbolic capitalists in the U.S. are overwhelmingly and increasingly aligned with the Democratic Party. In other countries, you see a similar thing. The Labour government in the UK, for instance, is the party of symbolic capital. Labour and the Greens collectively, I guess. But
you probably say the same thing about New Zealand Labour and Green Party here too.
Yeah. If you look at who in America is most likely to self-identify as an anti-racist, as a feminist, as an ally to LGBTQ people, as an environmentalist, and so on, it's the same constellation of people.
Okay, but you know why, of course, right? It's because these institutions that they move into, these universities, until recently, and actually still, they're deeply racist and sexist. And so all these people who are at Harvard and Yale and Oxford and Cambridge and Victoria University of Wellington, they're all oppressed, right? Or like a lot of them are oppressed because they're women and they get a raw deal. They're gay, they get a raw deal. They're Pacifica. In this country, these are the big minority categories. They're Maori. I mean, that's true, isn't it? Like Maori and Pacific people face racism, and so it's harder for them. And so that's why this discourse has emerged of wokeness or social justice in order to sort of rectify some of those inequalities.
Well, I mean, one thing that's important to note is that there doesn't seem to be much correlation between these discourses and rectifying the inequality. So, for instance, I see two things when I look at my work. First, if you look at the places where symbolic capitalists dominate, narratives about diversity, equity, and inclusion are very strong. You have really aggressive DEI bureaucracies, blah, blah, blah. But they're also some of the most parochial and like some of the most exclusionary and hierarchical and non-representative institutions in the entire country. If you look at what changes during these periods of awakening, when you have these kind of periods of rapid change in how people talk and think about social justice, what you never see in any of these episodes is major reallocations of wealth and opportunities and resources to the genuinely marginalized and the disadvantaged in society. There's just no correlation at all, as I show in the book. A bigger issue too is like, again, if you look at these are not the ways of talking and thinking that are characteristic of, the global slum, the trailer park, the inner city. These are kind of
or even individual cultural communities, right? Because it's kind of interesting. I think you make this point in some of the writing you did for Heterodox Academy that university progressives' expectation is that Hispanics are going to come onto campus and they're going to want to be referred to as Latinx, for example.
Mm-hmm.
This sort of non-binary way. And actually, like a lot of Hispanics are very conservative. I think probably on average they're more conservative than white Americans right now.
Yeah.
And there's a similar thing I think in New Zealand where it's kind of like there's the woke sort of worldview is that before British colonialism, everyone in the Pacific was sort of genderqueer. And maybe they were, I don't know, but I'm just saying that like nowadays the reality is if you go to Samoa, or you go to Tonga, you go to Niue, it's deeply religious. Yeah. Like they were heavily missionized and they've taken that up. They love Christianity at the moment. So it's just weird to me that then you go onto a university campus in New Zealand and everyone's telling you, if you're Pacifica, you must be kind of genderqueer and everything. And they're like, actually, I'm a Methodist.
Yeah.
Like, I'm a Mormon, right?
You can see this in the U.S. too, in the sense that, like, if you look at who are the people who speak on behalf of Indigenous Americans in academia, journalism, so on, there are these hyper-progressive people who make these really aggressive claims about, you know, what Indigenous Americans want in terms of representation, blah, 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 blah. Now, if you look at the actual political and moral alignments of Indigenous Americans in the United States, Donald Trump won the Indigenous vote pretty decisively in 2024. It wasn't close. Donald Trump decisively won Indigenous Americans in 2024, and the Republican Party has been gaining with Indigenous Americans, as well as with African Americans, Hispanics, and other groups for the whole time that the Great Awakening has been happening. That highly educated, relatively affluent, urban and suburban whites have been trending towards the Democratic Party. Working class people across racial and ethnic lines, religious people, including religious minorities, ethnic minorities, from Indigenous Americans to Asian Americans to African Americans, all of them have been shifting towards the right.
It's so fascinating, isn't it? Because it's exactly counter to the mainstream narrative that you get within academia.
Yeah.
Or within these sort of symbolic capitals.
Yeah.
Where it's kind of like Trump is a racist and hates, you know, people of other colors and genders, etc.
Well, and, you know, one of the things that I think a lot of us have had a hard time processing is that a lot of these trends seem to be driven less by Trump or the unique characteristics of Trump or some great messaging of the Republican Party or anything like that. It's driven more by alienation from the Democrats. You can see that because these trends predate Trump. So starting after 2010, if you look at the 2012 general election in the U.S., if you look at the 2014 midterms, all of these before Trump had even declared his candidacy or anything like that, you see the same trends already underway.
Are you saying that ethnic minorities were drifting away from Obama?
They started in Obama's second term, starting when the Democratic Party, as I show in some of my, you can see that after 2010, the Democratic Party platform, if you look at their 2012 platform, they shifted hard to the left. And they continued that way through 2016, while the Republican Party didn't shift nearly as much to the right in 2012, and in 2016 under Trump they actually moderated.
Really?
And so the reason the gap.
I'm not sure if I agree with that. I don't know how they did the figures on this, but it struck me that Trump was sort of more right wing than Mitt Romney or John McCain, right? Don't most people think that?
No. Well, in terms of things like, for instance, on economic policy, he was in favor of trade protectionism. He was for protecting entitlements like Medicaid and Social Security, whereas people like Paul Ryan and Mitt Romney wanted aggressive cuts and austerity to those programs. Even on LGBTQ issues, he on abortion at that time. In 2016, he had a very moderate posture on both of these things.
So what's with the perception that Trump is so much more right-wing then? Because everybody says this, right? That like people on the left, Democrats would have preferred John McCain or Mitt Romney to Trump, right?
Yeah,
Trump to them is the worst thing possible.
Well, but like there's a couple reasons why Trump is the worst thing possible, and I think it has less to do with politics and more to do with culture. So there is this kind of revulsion that a lot of us have to Trump. That's driven from the fact that, from two things. One, that he should be one of us, and he's not, which we find annoying. And two, that the people that he's more culturally affiliated with are people that we hate and detest. And so I'll expand that a little bit. So Trump, he grew up in New York City. He wasn't just born with a silver spoon in his mouth. He was born with like a diamond spoon in his mouth. He went to Ivy League school. He graduated from the Wharton School of Business at UPenn, an Ivy League school. Most of his wealth is derived from the symbolic profession. So people think of Trump as someone who does real estate and stuff, but actually there's research by Forbes that showed that if he just took his inheritance and just put it in a bank account and left it alone, he would have made more money than he did through his real estate companies, which consistently crashed. Almost the reason why he's not bankrupt and broke right now is because he made a lot of money through the symbolic professions, through his TV show, The Apprentice, through movie appearances like in Little Rascals, Home Alone, all of this kind of stuff, through licensing his brand. So he made almost all of it. So he is a symbolic capitalist. And so he should be one of us. But then you look at him. How does he talk? He talks in these very simple ways, despite his Ivy League education. He talks like someone who didn't go to college at all, to put it mildly, maybe someone who didn't graduate high school sometimes. He has this kind of gross spray tan thing that he puts on him that's not even convincing. You can see the kind of parts that he sprayed and didn't spray. He has this weird hairdo. He wears these ill-fitting suits.
I totally see that. It's weird that you say that he's a symbolic capitalist, because I was going to say, like, part of the reason that the left hate him so much, I think, is this class thing, this class aspect. Like, he eats the wrong meals, right? He just eats steak and fries.
Well, not just steak. He orders expensive steaks. He cooks them well done, like a savage, and then he squirts ketchup on them. Ketchup on a steak.
Okay, all that is true, and I definitely think, like, after Trump was elected the first time, I thought the people on the left, like people in academia, went really crazy about Trump. They overdid it completely. However, I think it kind of blinded me to the fact that I actually always have disliked Trump, and I thought he was kind of more dangerous than the average Republican candidate. And then after January 6th, I sort of, and the whole stuff about saying that the election was stolen, I thought, no, this is like genuinely bad. This is genuinely worse than just, I disagree with John McCain's economic policies or something.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's conversation about Trump is a different thing. But
yeah. Well, I'll just add real quick. I'll circle back to that because that's actually important. Another thing that kind of aggravates us though about Trump is that, he's the kind of guy. He went on WWE. Pro wrestling thing.
Yep.
He slapped Vince McMahon in the face, shaved his head. Like, this is not the kind of thing that people like us do. Like Kamala Harris, Joe Biden.
No, I know.
None of these people. They would never be caught dead at a WWE match, let alone slapping someone, shaving their head, all this kind of stuff. He seems to us.
Except now Billy Corgan's doing it, so now it's going to be cool again, I think. Because it's like an edgy thing. And,
God willing, but the right now, but he seems to us, he's always seemed to us like a trashy person. He seems to us aligned with and what's more infuriating to us about the fact that he seems trashy is that, again, he's a product of Ivy League schools. He grew up in the symbolic capitalist hub, New York City. He had all of this wealth, all of this kind of stuff. So we have this kind of revulsion. We've always had this like revulsion to him that's not purely rational. Now that said, and so when people talk about derangement syndrome, Trump derangement, I think there's a real there, and you can see this. I did this research for Columbia Journalism Review where I showed that the way that the media covered Trump in 2016 and after the election was unlike any other candidate in modern history.
David Rosado has graphs of that as well, right? Like references to Trump in all the newspapers in the States, much higher than any other presidential candidate. So I agree. That's the thing. Like I definitely think that they were deranged. A lot of the woke left were deranged by Trump. But then I also think that Trump is bad. Like, it's sort of like some people have phobias about alligators, and they think too much about alligators, and they're too scared of alligators. But alligators are also dangerous.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, and so for me, I thought a lot of that stuff was overblown. The kind of point, especially I think for most Americans until COVID, especially, if they had to think about, Barack Obama and Trump, about as different as you can get. But for most Americans, if you ask them what was different until COVID between Obama and Trump, not much. Like the economic trend, like before Trump was elected, there were all these narratives. The economy is going to crash. The institutions won't work. Blah, 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 blah. Trump got elected. He was doing his Trumpy thing. All the economic trend lines continued on the same. All the government institutions and systems continued to function. He tried to do things that were, he did these norm violations. He was consistently checked in court and stuff like this. For most Americans, the major difference that they would have noticed between Obama and Trump until COVID was that people like us spent that whole year, all day, every chance we got, going, all day, and like mocking and harassing and demonizing anyone who voted for Trump. Mm-hmm. Like that would have been the only difference that they knew from Trump to Obama, is that we freaked the flip out. But after COVID, and especially after George Floyd, I grew concerned personally, because you saw Trump doing some things like stuffing protesters into unmarked vans, so protesters who hadn't necessarily violated any laws, having officers who were not in uniforms in cars that were not marked as police cars with numbers such that people could look up what facility they're going to and stuff like this, stuffing protesters into unmarked
Well, let's go into our last topic now, because I wanted to talk about the future of universities and what's going on right now. And this is something also that I have against Trump. Like for years, I mean, I've been in Heterodox Academy for a long time. You were heavily involved in Heterodox Academy, so I know there are problems with universities. I want something to be done about them. I'm involved in the university reform movement here in New Zealand. But then Trump comes along, and I think, oh my God, you're going to ruin all this good work, because he's just gone much too far, right?
Yeah.
And now everyone in the universities is saying, he's actually threatening free speech, threatening our free speech. It was never about free speech, and this proves it. So that's true, right? So Trump is going too far in that, what he's doing with Colombia. And who is the chap? There was a guy who was actually expelled from the country, I think, for protesting in favor of the Palestinian cause.
Oh, well, he was detained, and they say they're going to, Mahmoud Khalil, they say they want to expel him, but he was detained for a long time, having committed no crime. I mean, Columbia University investigated him, and they found that he did nothing wrong. They actually issued him a formal apology for having harassed him in the first place a little bit during the protest. He didn't violate any university policies. Columbia University's own investigation found. And so the fact that he would be rounded up by ICE on Columbia property with Columbia okay, I'll say two things about this. First, these moves by the right, and it's not just Trump. It's Elon Musk. Elon Musk was like, free speech, free speech, free speech. Mm-hmm. And then he bought Twitter, and he promptly started throttling and censoring people who were criticizing him and people he didn't like. He started firing his employees who had political views he didn't like. And now Trump. A lot of the people who were like free speech, free speech, free speech, and who supported Trump on the basis of free speech, free speech, free speech. When Trump is punishing people for speaking out in ways that we're not talking about, like punishing people for speaking out as in saying mean things about them on the internet. We're talking about locking people up in detention camps without trials, right?
Or expelling citizens from the country.
Or expelling citizens from the country, or legal permanent residents, permanent green card holders who have without trial, and who haven't violated any laws on the basis of things like, this is much worse than universities canceling someone's teaching contract, which is terrible, or people facing social sanction, which is, again, terrible in many cases for their moral and political views and so on. Much worse. And a lot of the former free speechy people don't have much to say about that, or even trying to come up with justifications for it in many cases. And two, the response by universities to this assault has also been genuinely pathetic, like really pathetic. So Columbia, for instance, they have a large endowment, a large enough endowment that they could actually just support themselves for 4 years until Trump is out of office, a large enough endowment such that they can take him to court and probably win, because a lot of these moves are actually legally dubious.
So he's cut federal funding to certain universities, right? So federal research funding, which I read an article by you in The Guardian recently, it accounts for something like 5% of Columbia's research income, or total income.
They could more than easily fill that, rather than doing that.
They have like a $10 billion endowment or something.
Yeah. Rather than doing that, though, they just fold it immediately. And Harvard also.
Why did they do that? I was actually quite surprised, because I sort of thought, like, I think the woke academics are crazy, but I thought at least they can be relied upon to like push back against Trump. But of course, many of them have. But I mean, why did the top brass at these universities sometimes just keel over?
Yeah, and I'll say real quick, Harvard did too. Harvard, their initial plan was to follow Columbia. The reason they didn't ultimately was because Trump made demands of them that were bigger than Columbia's and that were literally impossible to follow. So they told them to do things that were literally illegal in terms of sharing information that they were legally not permitted to share. And they also gave them demands that self-contradicted. Like they said, you have to abolish litmus tests in hiring and promotion, and you also have to hire people based on ideology. We need more conservatives. And so it's actually impossible to do both of those things simultaneously to eliminate litmus tests while imposing litmus tests. And so Harvard was in a position where they literally couldn't comply.
Yeah.
But
I sort of sympathize with that choice because that kind of faces all university reformers at the moment. But yeah, you shouldn't recommend both of them at the same time because that makes no sense.
But then pathetically, and even in Harvard's letter to Trump where they said, look, we can't do this, we're going to sue you. Even then, they complained about all the anticipatory compliance they did after Trump was elected. They already suppressed all the protesters on the campus. They already did this. They already set up all these new surveillance programs. They already, all of these things that they already did to try to appease Trump before he even demanded anything of them. And they were mad because they didn't get credit for it. So we complied so hard. We complied before you even demanded us to comply. We are so compliant, and you didn't give us any credit for it. So now we have to go to court. That's a pathetic response. Okay, so why did they? Why are they pathetic? So this is actually the topic that. The main topic of my conversation that I'm going to be having today for the Free Speech Union, the talk I'm going to be
talk again. We better wrap up in about 5 minutes because you're about to go to Parliament and give a talk.
Yeah, so I'll give a preview of the core question I'm going to investigate. Cool. There's this paradox. On the one hand, if you look at most workers in the United States, they have zero freedoms, zero freedom of speech, zero protections for freedom of conscience, for freedom of association, for privacy, none. Not even the First Amendment applies in private workplaces.
Okay, so basically if I'm in a normal job and I disagree with my boss and say so, and the boss gets rid of me, I don't have a leg to stand on.
Absolutely no protections at all. Even if he just sees you said something weird on social media and it creates a problem for him, he can fire you. Like it's none, no protections, even for extramural speech.
He likes the Maple Leafs. I like the Canadians. He kicks me out.
Yeah. Okay. Now academics, on the other hand, we have pretty robust protections for freedom of speech, actually formally, and they've been expanding consistently as a result of lawsuits and things like this.
In New Zealand too. Yeah, New Zealand law. Yeah. It should be. It should actually be working, but they don't. So,
and yet, despite the fact that we have more formal freedoms than basically any other workers, actually, if you look, academics are much, much more likely to self-censor than basically anyone else in the workforce, despite having much more protections than basically anyone else in the workforce. And we're also much more likely to support censorship of other people. I
have a good possible academic explanation for this, which is maybe we're just more intelligent.
Well,
because academics see that they're going to get canceled, whereas everyone else just thinks, oh, no, they canceled, then they get canceled.
Well, so what I'm going to argue actually is that that's not entirely wrong. It is we are more cognitively sophisticated. We have a lot more specialized knowledge than other people. But some of the same traits that are tied up with that also make us more likely to be conscientious, conformists, status-seeking, risk-averse, and so on. So we have this kind of set of traits and dispositions that cluster together that on the one hand make us really adept at succeeding in academia, but also on the other hand make it really easy to dominate our institutions or to capture our institutions.
I also think intelligent people are just very good at sort of self-justifying.
Yes.
They go along with things and they do shameful things, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And they've done shameful things in the past few years. And then they can sort of come up with a really good explanation for why that was actually okay.
Yes.
Yeah. It's kind of like there's this finding that motivated reasoning, you actually get better at it if you're an intelligent person, because motivated reasoning, for people who don't know, is basically when you fit reasons and evidence to things you already believe. And you think that intelligent people or academics would be, good at getting around it. But in fact, they're almost they're super good at it.
Yeah.
Because they can just find an explanation or bits of data that they can twist and, to whatever argument they want.
Yeah. The more knowledge we have, the more cognitive ability we have, the better we are actually at coming up with reasons to stick with our guns in defiance of the evidence or to, justify bad actions on behalf of ourselves or other institutions or people that we're affiliated with. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. This has been great, Musa. I mean, I remember reading your stuff when you were in Heterodox Academy, when I was in my early days in Heterodox Academy, and I always thought it was fantastic because, well, A, you're very data-driven, you take a hard look at the evidence, and B, you're also like an exemplary sort of heterodox individual yourself. Because, I mean, there are conservatives in academia who are just straight-up conservatives or libertarians, and that's fine, but I mean, I think it's really interesting when people sort of come from different backgrounds, and they're sometimes on the left, sometimes on the right. So for all these reasons, it's been a great pleasure talking to you.
It's so great to meet you IRL.
So as the kids say, yeah.
Yeah.